moment, but we'll get you settled in. Everyone's wondering what's going on here, but this is going to be the subcommittee B for public safety, and then we'll go into economic development and tourism.
So you said
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think that everyone's here. There might be a few members that trickle in here in just a few minutes, but before we get into our agenda for, today, I would like to call on Representative Susan Holmes to pray for us, opening a little word of prayer.
Thank you, my friend Matthew. Dear Lord, thank you for this group, and thank you for people who are willing to spend the time and make the effort to take care of the citizens of this great state. Please give us the wisdom and the courage to make the decisions in your name, for we ask it in your precious name. Amen.
Thank you. All right, welcome to the Economic Development and Tourism Committee meeting. We have a couple of pieces of legislation before us today, and so you should all have a copy of SR 142 and SR 135 and SB 142 in your folder. And I'm going to go over SR 135 LC 365310S. And then SB 142 is LC 365311S. And so those two pieces of legislation are before us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our chairman, Chairman Stevens. Yes.
I'd like to be recognized, if I may, please. We're here for a hearing only on House Resolution 1026, and we've known about that for quite a while. All of the information I had on the notice that we were going to meet did not have SB 142 nor SR 135 on that. I'd like to ask the chair, if possible, let's do those as hearing only also. This is such a big thing that we're taking up, and I think we should do that as a hearing only and be able to discuss that some before we vote on it. Thank you.
I understand that. I've spoken with Chairman Stevens, and he's requested that this be a vote on these two bills today. So with that, we're going to turn it over to him and let him present the bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for being here today. Before I get started, I want to thank Sean Marie Story. She's in the corner over here. This lady has spent hundreds, literally hundreds of hours since we started talking about this issue, even last year and year before, but specifically this time. And it's the amount of time that she spent on the issue whenever I would talk to her on the weekends even is pretty amazing. Bruce Bowers is here with me, basically my resident expert when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't even play the lottery, so I'm the fish out of water whenever I started doing this deal. But, you know, keep in mind, we've all, over the past 30 years, it's our 30th anniversary, Mr. Chairman. We've had all of our children, grandchildren even, that have benefited from the Hope Scholarship. So we've been gaming with this 30th anniversary now for, like I say, quite some time. And over 2 million of our Georgia students have gotten the Hope Scholarship and were able to lift themselves up. As promised with Zell Miller in the beginning. You keep a B average, you get a higher education, the great equalizer, if you will. And then, of course, the other thing that comes down is pre-K. We've got 1.6 million families in Georgia that had the opportunity to get even, in my mind, something that's even more valuable, and that's a head start in pre-K. And that's a very big deal. And of course, we can't fund it fully, and it's on a lottery position. So we hope that we can begin to fill that gap today. I want to start with the Senate Resolution 135. This came over last year from the Senate, and again, we've spent hundreds of hours working on this. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, this is going to be a local control bill. As I'm presenting to you today, if you pass this, if it passes out of the House, the state of Georgia will vote on it this November. And I can tell you now, there is no legislation for destination resorts or horse racing that we'll be considering today. The only thing that we're considering is the resolution that sets up the framework. But after that, once we set up, it passes the resolution, then of course we've got to do the enabling legislation. And after that, just as we did with alcohol, as you might remember, we allowed the locals to make that decision. And that's what this bill will do. Before any bricks and mortar of any sort goes up, the locals are going to have to decide on that. Does that mean Savannah's going to get one of these? Absolutely not. They've already sent us a resolution. They don't want it. But who am I in Savannah, Georgia, ladies and gentlemen, to tell these folks in Henry County who want to spend $1 billion if they so choose? But again, it's local control, and they decide. And that's somewhere down the road. That's not even what we're voting on today. Ladies and gentlemen, Senate Resolution 135 removes all or makes all form of gaming allowable and provided by law. Nonprofit bingo games are allowed if provided by law. The state lotteries are allowed if provided by law. Proceeds shall be appropriated as they are today for tuition grants and scholarship loans, volunteer pre-K, education shortfalls, costs for teachers and professors, and training technology, capital outlay projects. In D, nonprofit raffles are allowed but may be restricted and prohibited by law. Sports betting, and this is on the next bill, but I'll go ahead and talk about this now because it's in the constitutional amendment. Those of you that may know, you can do sports betting today. It's on your phone. It's an app. But keep in mind that money is going offshore, Antigua, some of these other places. When this bill came over, before I move on, 24 states were doing sports betting in 25 states in the country. Just in a year, we're up to 33 states and projected to go to 44. Now, why is that? Well, that's because you're already doing it. So you might say that all you're doing today is whenever you pass this resolution to get to the House and with the bill, is you're taxing and regulating, and that's all because you're already doing this particular sports betting. So, sports betting. The General Assembly may authorize and regulate and tax sport betting. Except for 3 through 5, the proceeds shall be used for operational expenses, franchise and royalty fees for instrumentalities, up to 10% of the operation expenses of the instrumentality, and the remainder is treated the same as taxation. We will tax it for the first time, up to 20% of the licensing fees, if you will. The licensing fees, and I'll get to that in a minute, this 20% goes to the sports marketing fund. We've been trying to set up a revolving fund for some time to go out and market things like the Super Bowl, the Final Four, the soccer, the World Soccer. So this marketing fund will come directly from the fees that we generate from the licensing fees. The proceeds of the taxation will be put in the annual budget. And this is important, ladies and gentlemen. Sports betting, which is the next bill we'll talk about, 100% of the dollars go towards education. Let me say that again. 100% of the dollars for sports betting go towards education. 50% of the proceeds go to tuition grants, scholarships, and loan, and pre-K as it does today. 50% of the proceeds go to an opportunity fund, and that's for those who are in the 50th percentile of income, which in Georgia is about $58,000. That's a pool that they're able to access whenever the tuition costs more than the scholarship pays. We call that gap funding. This money will fill that in. It can also be used for pre-K for those families that fall in that income. And ladies and gentlemen, the example that I like to use is the foster child. You know, he's done everything that Zell Miller told him he needed to do to get an education, but he can't make the difference in what the tuition costs versus what the scholarship pays, gap money. That 50th percentile and this opportunity fund would do that. F, and other forms of betting and gaming. The term other forms of betting and gaming will include pari-mutuel betting, and destination resorts. The General Assembly may authorize and regulate and tax other forms of betting and gaming. It must restrict pari-mutuel betting and destination resorts to counties that pass the referendum. Now that's important. We've never had that before. In 30 years, there's never been one iota of local control, not one. We're going to change that, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll pass this resolution. Except for the purposes in 3 through 5 may be used for operating expenses. Up to 20% of the licensing fees and pari-mutuel betting, we've had this conversation before, will go to the arts and entertainment venue. As you might recall, we had some conversation with the Fox and other folks that said these are authorized in the state of Georgia, they'll compete with their venue. Now, if this happens, if you'll notice the proceeds, the tax on these types of gaming, half of the money goes to health care. Any of you guys in rural Georgia got a problem with hospitals holding on with their fingernails right now, with their going out of business? What about mental health? Have you all seen the phenomenal fiscal note on mental health? It is huge. So half of the money, which will be a big pile, will go for health care. 20% of the money goes for economic development and less census tracts in the state. That's also a big deal. We've been trying for years, for me anyway, to try to get broadband in these broadband deserts. Now that's just one of the things that can happen, but that's in the rural areas with these less developed census tracts. 15% goes to voluntary pre-K. We can finally fund pre-K. And 15% goes to the Opportunity Fund. Mr. Chairman, that is the extent of the resolution. And I've got Bruce Bowers here as the expert if they've got some questions. And I'd also like, Mr. Chairman, to have the dean of our house to at least make a comment, and I appreciate him sitting up here with us.
All right, Dean Smyrie, we're glad to have you with us, and be glad for you to share something if you want to.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm really happy to be here, and I want to thank Chairman Ron Stevens. I think we started talking around 2015 about designated resorts and sports gaming in the state of Georgia. You know, being here for the number of years, I remember when we had the lottery referendum, and when lottery was brought up, and which is a form of gambling, and there was a lot of people who were opposed to that, but you can see what the benefit that has had in our state as it relates to education being our number one issues, and education being the escalator to mobility is a key. But the reason I'm here today is because a lot have gone into this, a lot of dialogue we've had, and this prohibition on gaming with the referendum on November 22nd, I think is the route to go. I want to thank the chairman for his willingness to accept things as we go, and I want to say this publicly. Representative Williams was one of the first to mention the local referendum matter, and explicitly how that's not only a constitutional amendment, but a local referendum on where there is going to be gaming established in any particular area, and he's worked with us and others in the House, and I just wanted to say that as it relates to the bucket that we have that relates itself to census tracts, to the pre-K, and to opportunity educational. We've been talking about need-based for a long time, and this would be a great opportunity to provide a services for those that have not been able to qualify for HOPE, but yet can get this funding through medium income. So that's another area. And the last thing I want to mention, and the chairman mentioned it, is sports betting. As we sit here today, $1 billion is bet on sports on right now, as we speak. And the only thing we're trying to do is capture some of that for the citizens of the state of Georgia. And with the 20% and not knowing what the total revenue is, but right now 800 to 1 billion is done illegally in the state of Georgia. So sports betting is a key, and of course it has a bucket of formula thereof as well. So I'm here to support the chair and ask you as a committee. I just asked, the last thing I asked, why not let the people decide? What's wrong with letting our constituents decide whether or not they want it in the state of Georgia? And with that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity. I'm delighted that the chairman asked me to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. We have a lot of questions from members of the committee, so at this time we'll be taking these questions on the bill. I'm going to start with Chairman Nix. Has had his light on a long time, so Chairman Nix, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I find it quite ironic that in the year that we are working so hard to fight this problem of mental health, that we want to put the Georgia state stamp on something that says we want to let people do this when it is one of the most addictive things that people can do, and it causes more problems than just about anything. The first sign of to an outsider that a person is suffering from a gambling addiction might be the loss of a home, divorce, or even suicide. And to those who want to talk about all the great things the lottery does, go stand in your local Quick Stop on Friday afternoon and just see where these dollars come from. Because they come out of the pockets of people who can least afford it. They may do some good things with it, but this is not something that the state of Georgia wants to put its stamp of approval on. The number one state to do business, we don't need this. This is what people do that are desperate, and this state is doing extremely well. And I would say that I would urge my friends here to let's vote this thing down. The Senate's already voted down a resolution to allow gambling, and there's no reason this House should have to do it either. I'll just make a statement. I don't want to ask a question. Everybody knows exactly where I stand. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. One, I don't see if it does, but I just want to make sure this doesn't prohibit any type of funding in schools, such as music or the arts or anything like that. That's going to be dictated in the enabling legislation, I'm assuming?
Yes, there's no enabling legislation for destination resorts or parimutuel horse racing, yes. And that'll come in the enabling at some point in the future.
And the next question is on...
And of course, let me just say real quick, the only thing that we're dealing with a bill today is sports betting. Okay, sorry.
Say that again?
The only bill that we're dealing with today besides the constitutional amendment is sports betting.
Okay. So the second question is just something I don't know if it's an oversight or if I'm just nitpicking, but on line 54, it's the only place where the word public is not in front of education. Projects for educational facilities. Above it, you've got public institutions and public post-secondary. Is that an oversight or?
That's existing language.
Is it something that could be cleaned up, possibly? Just a question.
Sure, but it's, like I say, this is, but yeah, that should be, that's a fix.
Okay.
How would you fix that?
The last question is around the referendum. The local referendum, that too is going to be part of the enabling legislation, not the constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which means that could be changed at any time without the 120 and without another constitutional amendment.
Correct. And then, but you hit the nail on the head. There's no enabling legislation yet that allows that. And then it's going to require two more things. Your county commissioners are going to have to put it on a ballot as they do with alcohol. And then the ballot question would be on the if it ever is brought to the public. So yes.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Mallow.
Thank you, Chairman. Good friend, Chairman Stevens, I got just a couple questions. And the first question I want to reference is on LC 36530S, line 138. Is it possible to add on line 138 and kind of clean this up a little bit to increase the well, it says a 50% of healthcare services, including but not limited to programs, and support healthcare workers in hospitals to increase the accessibility and availability of mental health. Is it possible to add and substance abuse treatment and other health-related programs? I think that may be helpful to have a few more folks feel comfortable with this today if we're able to add that in substance abuse. On line 138 LC 3653010S.
No, that's not a problem. Yeah, that shouldn't be an issue at all.
Absolutely. And I know we worked with the Georgia Entertainment Caucus. They worked hard on this as well. I just had a question on line 135 on LC 3653011S. How did you come up with the language, Chairman, on fantasy or simulated contests?
We're going to do that one next. That's the bill.
Yeah, we're not on that bill yet.
Y'all, I'm ahead of the game. I'm reading all morning.
You did good.
You're just trying to get over to the Senate.
He's fast.
I'm messing with you. All right. Representative Sains.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, thank you for addressing the, I know you noted the offshore issue with sports betting is, and I know you have the Dean of the House here. Is it possible that currently any of that money is going to the Dominican Republic?
Oh. I'm certain.
That's one.
I certainly hope there's $1 or $2 that goes over there.
Thank you.
I bet it does.
Golly. Okay. Let's see. Is that number 8? Representative Williams, Leader Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank you, Chairman Stevens, for all the work you have done on this bill, and certainly thank Dean Smari through the years. Let me say this before I say anything and make a short statement. The biggest difficulty I have here is having to be on opposite side of a gentleman who's leaving the legislature who I have as much respect for as any man I know, and I consider him a dear friend. I hate to be on the opposite side. That grieves me more than anything else. But that being said, as I've looked at this, and every HBCU president in this state was polled, and we asked them, what are some of the biggest problems you experience? And to a person, it's the dropping out of students for lack of funds to stay in school, gap funding. Then these students who live below the median income line, they can't pick up the phone and call home and say, Mama, I need $1,000 when Mama is working for minimum wage. The possibility that we can do something for gap funding, and there is nothing where there are not some problems. We talk to sheriffs. My sheriff in Liberty County, he's welcomed me because he said, we talk about bringing in crime. He said, there's not one crime being mentioned that we don't already have. But this will give us tools through the revenue to do a better job. And he said, my experience has been the safest places around are the places where gaming is allowed. But I digress. Back to gaming and sports betting. I had not paid any attention or knew anything about it, and went to watch a game one night with the Hawks. And there was a gentleman explaining it, and it was like Greek to me. And my son was sitting beside me. He said, Dad, that's nothing. He took his cell phone out. He said, I can place it right now, any place in the world. And I was astonished. And I said, you do realize that we don't keep any of the money that you send to some unknown bank account. $1 billion going someplace. State of Georgia not getting any of it. There is no way, if we defeat this, do you think we're going to drop anybody that does sports betting now? Do you think they're going to quit because they're going to be so upset that we no longer take it? But we get a chance to get some money out of them. Now, it might be, in some folks' opinion, slightly tainted. But I remember what Oral Roberts said. He said the Lord was going to kill him if he didn't raise $5 million. And the guy who had a big dog racing track down in Florida gave him $3 million. He said, Reverend, you going to take this money? He said, you going to give the preacher your money is tainted. The guy said, the only thing wrong with my money, tain't enough. But you see, it's going to be spent. And you'd rather go on all these cell phones and us not get paid anything. We finally wised up to the online ordering and started taxing that. But this is the big gorilla here. This is where the real funds and children that need to stay in school can stay in school, and children who are in pre-K, which is the beginning of a good life, can go to pre-K. We have lines now, lotteries, and people can't get in because it's underfunded. And if anybody has anything on the table that can eliminate the problems we have in healthcare and the problems we have in education, no matter how good we're doing, we leave too many people behind. Big Mama been buying a ticket for years with $1 and a dream, and her dream had never gotten boo-boo in college yet. Let's do something that could give him the opportunity to have a solid education and not drop out for lack of $300, $400, $500 in gap funding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so did you have a question?
Is that not so?
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Stevens, and thank you, Representative Williams, for the humor, but the candor. May I have a couple of questions, sir? One, when we talk about health care, and as my good colleague asked for the insertion of substance abuse, is this silent to gambling addictions, or is this silent to irresponsible gambling? And if we need to put that language there so that it's clear that that's included?
Excuse me. Yeah, it's in the bill. It's in the bill, but as you might recall, we don't have a enabling legislation for the substance abuse. Keep in mind, the lottery already has a piece for substance abuse already there, where they put a percentage there for substance abuse. Substance abuse. I guess that's the word I'm looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow-up, additional questions, and thank you. I just walked in. I've not had the time to look through that, so thank you for that. I'm going to believe that. If we go down to line 151, 152, 15% to the educational programs and educational purposes provided for in subparagraph C2. I was looking for subparagraph C2.
C2 is line 44.
Line 24?
44.
44. All right, thank you so much. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
That's pre-K.
Thank you. All right, Representative Hobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at lines 121 through 128, is it possible to add verbiage around providing arts education funding for eligible K through 12 public schools? Maybe having this as an option for those schools applying through an application process, and also including Title I schools having the ability to apply for music and arts in those school programs. Is it possible to add that?
You know, we've got line 123. It has the Georgia Arts and Entertainment Venue Funds, and that venue fund should be able to disperse those out through grants.
Okay, but is that...
And this is, believe me, this is a constitutional amendment, so it kind of needs to be broad.
Okay.
And the other piece is, too, if and when the enabling legislation like this other one here is for sports betting, a lot of these fine-tuning things need to be addressed in that instead of the real broad constitutional amendment. But I'm all for adding whatever we need to make sure that the funds get to arts education.
In our public schools, and
Yes.
definitely our Title I schools. That would be much appreciative. And also, I want to thank Representative Al Williams for mentioning the GAP funding as someone who fights hard for our Albany State University students to obtain that GAP funding, and I've personally taken my own money and helped some of the students. Thank you for putting that into your I don't know if that was a question, comedy show or what have you, but thank you for it.
All right, Representative Dukes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I want to appreciate you for bringing this bill. I think it is great legislation. Of course, I would have liked to have seen some other things differently done about it. First of all, with the name, it maybe should not have been called the Georgia Sports Betting Integrity Act. Maybe the Full Employment for Lobbyists Act. A lot of my friends are working. They really are. And I kind of hate it because they have worked real hard and have been tirelessly trying to get this bill passed. Because I think it'll be good for Georgia. There were some things here that I would have liked to have seen in it. I mean, working with what Representative Hopkins has observed and Representative Williams, and that was there are definite disparities that have occurred at HBCUs historically over time, for that they have very serious problems with program development and recruitment and retention. Much of this is as a result of historical deprivation that the state has been involved with over time. And maybe this might not be the tool to address that. But I think at some point it needs to be addressed. Because what has happened is that many of these institutions, because of the programs that they have there, have not created alums. They don't have law schools, medical schools, schools of engineering, where their alums are put in a position where they can acquire wealth. And if you can acquire wealth, then what you can do is that you can give back to your institutions. So at some point, I think this legislature and this state somewhat needs to address it. But I think we are at this hour that we have talked about it quite a bit. And it's time for us to move it to the point, and let's put it on the board, and let's light it up.
All right, thank you. Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. This looks like it creates, could you explain a little bit more about the Georgia Marketing Seed Fund? And that's a new fund to be created?
It is. We've worked on a concept now for years, and this was brought to us by the Atlanta Chamber. As you might know, over the years with the Super Bowl and others, they're at a disadvantage whenever they try to market this stuff because they have to go to the hoteliers and others. And really, it didn't connect the dots. So this seed fund will go through the sports marketing fund and create one. And it seems to me, and it connects the dots, that if you're sports betting, and that'll be over in 142, connects the dot that the very venues that sports betting will be made are the ones that we're trying to attract. So
how are we marketing for these venues now?
we're at a loss for we're having to go to the Atlanta Chamber, to the hoteliers in the area. They've got a fund, and it's difficult. They're having to essentially raise the money up front before they can market this. Many of these things, like the World Cup, if you will, is it pronounced FIFA or FIFA?
FIFA.
The other way around. FIFA is what you do in a house whenever the sales.
FIFA is what happens when you lose your home from
Exactly.
gambling.
That's a FIFA. That's a bad thing. No, that's true. You do a FIFA. That takes a large amount of money to go out and do. So this fund would essentially help market that.
And so is it your understanding that we are losing out on these sporting events now as a result of not having this money?
Yes.
And so, and then tell me about the Georgia Arts and Entertainment Venue Fund. Is that an additional fund created under this?
That would come within some legislation in the future if we create some enabling legislation as a result of this. It's not on there today. But yes, we've had testimony in the past from some of these small venues that said that they can't compete with these larger destination resorts for the acts that come in there, and so the Fox and some of these other small cities might have a problem. So that's the purpose of that fund.
And so who would control both of these newly created funds?
The General Assembly, yeah.
So why can't we just do that through appropriations?
You could, but the fund you would appropriate that through the General Assembly through the appropriations process.
And then the last question I have is regarding the ballot question itself. In particular, it reads, Assembly to provide by law for sports betting and other forms of betting and gambling in this state for educational needs, healthcare services, and other purposes. What other purposes do we expect to spend this money on?
They're listed in the constitutional amendment, all four of those. Yeah, economic development.
Okay. All right. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And please excuse me for being late, but there were two meetings scheduled at the same time. I just think that this is very good for the state of Georgia. I remember over how many years, Representative Stevens, when you've been talking about this. I believe I was the mayor of the city when I first heard about it. And we started talking about it within our city because we also know that we are in the Bible Belt. And it's very seldom that you hear someone say that they're not for it. When you look at the buses that are leaving our community on a weekly basis, and particularly on weekends, people are going to other communities to gamble. If we don't do something now, we will be stepping up behind everybody else. I think now is the time, particularly with money going into higher education. I retired from higher education, historically black college, and thank you for addressing Representative Williams and the young lady down the other end. There is a need. There is a need. I've seen many kids having to drop out of school for lack of funding. Everyone is saying $1,000, but I worked in financial aid, and I've seen kids drop out for lack of $500. This is something that can happen that can help not only HBCUs, but also my question, I guess you got to put in formal question, Al? Yes, is it not true? Is it not true that in looking at all of this, that it will help higher education?
And pre-K, yes, ma'am.
And to help young people. Is it not true that this will help health issues that we are experiencing across the state of Georgia?
No doubt.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Representative Vance Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, the legislation that we have is strictly about sports betting.
Yes, sir.
But the constitutional amendment is about everything. Why would we just do a constitutional amendment about sports betting?
Well, then we're going to have to come back. If you'll notice, fantasy sports is not in here, and that's not sports betting. So the idea is to eliminate the prohibition and then make local control, if you will. So the prohibition goes away. Otherwise, we're right back here next year talking about sports betting and fantasy sports, which will need another constitutional amendment. That's not sports betting.
So instead of going one step at a time, we're just going to do the whole thing.
And let the locals decide.
All right, Representative Robichaux.
Thank you. And thanks for the bill, but with so much of the other portions, you know, 50% for this, 50% up to, in lines 113 through 120, where we talk about operational costs, is there a reason why there was not an upper limit set as to how much could actually be, you know, spent and utilized into operational costs, so that we optimize for what these funds should be, you know, if we're going to use these funds for the betterment of all of Georgians and not create another huge bureaucracy that we're paying for in addition? I mean, I know we're going to have to create something, but keeping it as limited as possible, or am I misreading this?
None of the proceeds from the taxation would be used here. This refers strictly to the fees, fines, assessments, and licensing fees and penalties. So the limit would be those amounts as opposed to any of the proceeds.
Well, if I read it correctly, it says all proceeds derived by the state or any of its instrumentalities from other forms of betting and gambling, including but not limited to licensing fees, fines, assessments, penalties, and others. So I guess to me that means it was all inclusive. So if you're telling me that's not the case, it's...
I misread. My error. I apologize for that.
Okay.
I apologize.
I'm not, I mean, I'm just reading.
No, I misread. I was looking at a different section. I apologize.
Okay. So is that a possibility of, you know, setting X percentage of operational fees so that we can maximize and optimize what
Agreed.
these funds could be used for our residents?
Sure.
Okay. Representative Paris.
Thank you, Chairman. I think everybody knows where I stand with all of this at this point. But I have a question from someone, and they're wondering on line 123, could a nonprofit apply to the fund? Say, like to benefit schools with field trips, music museums, art galleries, things like that?
That would probably come from the Arts Commission, and like I say, yes, they can, and they give grants out from the, and it's not called the Arts Commission. I apologize. It's a statewide arts fund that we would fund, if you will, through some of this, and they give funds out for all of these. Yes.
I appreciate you, Chairman Stevens, and I appreciate all of the hard work that you've done on this work. I live in a community where I see it every day. I see people going to convenience stores just on a whim, just on a hope and a prayer that they can turn their $20 into $200,000. And it's a sad sight, you know, and I just don't know that trying to find this money through the source of gambling when the state probably has this money that they could cough up from somewhere else. I just don't see it. Throwing money at our social ills doesn't always fix it, and doesn't matter how much lipstick we put on a pig, it's still a pig.
If I may, if I can answer, Mr. Chairman, you know, let's not forget the only bill that we're talking about today is sports betting. This authorizes it all. There'll have to be more legislation coming. You're doing it today, or there's a $1.5 billion Georgians that are doing it today on your phone. And the money, of course, is going in the Caribbean. So all that we're asking today is that Georgia, along with 33 other states, on our way to 44, regulate it and tax it on something we're already doing. Now, if we vote it down today, then you're still going to do it, and the revenue is going to go somewhere else. And that's only on sports betting.
All right, Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Stevens. Is it not true that gambling, that people can form an addiction to gambling?
Oh, no doubt, yes.
Yes, and is it not true that gambling, that addiction can cause suffering?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So I would like to say that I agree with the goals, and all of us have to decide about the end. Does the end justify the means? And I know we all share, the end goal of fully funding pre-K, fully funding our HBCUs, and I share those goals, but I too share the concerns about the means, about how we're getting there, and I would not like Georgia to profit off the human suffering caused by this gambling. So it's a choice, we're all making, and so we can share the dreams of the end goal, but we may not agree on the means.
Agreed, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, there are those who believe we shouldn't be gambling at all. So I would offer this constitutional amendment, and I'll just read it to you here, is proposing an amendment to the Constitution so that is to provide that all forms of gambling shall be illegal, to provide related matters, and provide submission for this amendment and ratification. So I see it as another, and I'll sign it with you. Point taken.
Okay. Representative Don Hogan.
Mr. Chairman, private schools, the revenue from this, are they able to go to private schools, and what's the mechanism of getting this money to private schools?
For post-secondary?
Post-secondary school, yes. For college, yes.
No, I was asking, I'm sorry, it's a question.
Private high schools, private grammar schools.
No.
They don't get any of this money.
No, sir.
The pre-K program, as I understand it, is applicable to some public and to some private schools. And so to the extent that funding is going to the pre-K programs, yes, sir, that is the case.
Even if it's private?
I believe so. I don't know exactly today. It was that way when my children were going. They went to a private pre-K program. I don't know if those rules have changed.
All right, Chairman Nix.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It seems as though we're talking about sports betting. At the appropriate time, I'd like to offer an amendment and just strike out the information on lines 12 and 13 that says all other forms of betting and gambling. That way we'll get to that. The sponsor has said several times, all we're talking about is sports betting. But when you read this thing, this opens it up to anything that anybody wants to do in the state of Georgia. It is not just about sports betting. So let's be honest with what we're doing, and I will offer an amendment at the appropriate time to strike that language.
Oh, okay, thank you. We still have a few questions left that we're going to get to. All right, I'm going to Representative Hobson.
Just one quick question. Going back to the Georgia Marketing Seed Fund and the other fund that was mentioned, you mentioned something about the Atlanta Chamber. What was that again?
The Atlanta Chamber is the one that has been operating the sports marketing and trying to pull these large venues into Georgia.
Okay, and so did I hear you say that they would be involved in the Georgia Marketing Seed Fund as well and the other funds?
Yes.
Okay.
Through the chamber, they create the sports council.
Okay, all right. So the sports council will be pretty much the overseer for this. Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative Eric Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to piggyback on Chairman Nix, and I think it was Van that also said it. That we're talking about sports betting only, but you keep referencing local control. I just want to make sure we're on the same page that there is no local control with the sports betting. That is statewide.
Correct. Yes.
So even though we're just talking about sports betting, the local control conversation for sports betting is not relevant.
Correct, because it's an app on your phone. The local control would be if you build any bricks and mortar somewhere. That's those kind of venues. Thank you.
Representative Mallow.
Chairman Stevens, I've just got a follow-up question, and that is related to the pre-K funding. Would this allow for pre-K teachers, by increasing the pre-K funding, to move to the pay schedule of K-12 teachers, so that if we're increasing funding for pre-K, those teachers have to be compensated, because currently pre-K teachers aren't on the same full-time schedule as K-12 teachers?
I don't know the answer to that.
would certainly increase the funding for it. I don't know what levels of funding that would take, but it would certainly increase the available funds to do so, yes.
Absolutely, thank you. Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I would like to move for a due pass.
Okay. Representative Saines.
Thank you, and Chairman Nix really alluded to my first question, which would be to distinctify the two bills, which this one would be about all forms of gambling, but I believe the authors agreed on that. I'm trying to find the language where it notes about local control that you had mentioned. Where is that on SB 135 or 142? And if so, is it just counties that have the ability to option, or would cities be allowed to as well?
It's taxing authority, and let me find the language for you.
It's in lines 108 to 112.
Yeah, line 108 to 112.
It's actually 110 to lines 110 to 112.
What?
110 to 112.
On 135?
On 135, yes. 5310S, LC 365310S.
So it is only counties then?
Yes.
So why would, is there if a county were to, or if a city were to want it in a county that disagreed with it, the city would not be able to do so, is that correct?
Not according to this legislation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That completes the questions that we have at this time. And I know I've heard a lot of comments about amendments that would offered and whatnot, but I guess at this time, what is the will of this committee on this legislation? All right. We have a motion from Representative Mallow. Will you state that again?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, due pass.
All right. We have a motion and a second on due pass on SR 135. All in favor? Is there further discussion? All right. And this is the proper time where we will entertain amendments that were discussed. All right, number 25.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Since we have said that this is all about sports betting, I move that as an amendment that we go to line 12 and we strike out all other forms of betting and then we go to the question, line 162, to provide for laws for sports betting and then strike out and other forms of betting and gambling.
And also on line 10.
I'm also told that it's on line 10 as well. But all language that would pertain to anything other than sports betting, since we're talking about sports betting and what's going on, because this resolution is not just about sports betting. This resolution opens us up to casinos, it opens us up to pari-mutuel horse racing, it opens up to everything. So let's just be genuine with what we're doing, let's make it about sports betting, and that's my amendment.
All right, we're waiting on Sean Marie to come back, but I hear your proposal. We have a motion and a second on that amendment, and all in favor of the amendment as Representative Nick stated, and I really would like for her to be in here, and she's coming back in. Sean Marie, we're in the middle of amending an amendment proposal here. If you could, just for the record, if you could state that again, exactly what you said just a minute ago.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay, go ahead.
First of all, the purpose of the amendment is to make this strictly about sports betting and to take the constitutional amendment and make it line up with what we're talking about, because we keep talking about sports betting. And in order to do that, and you may need to help me on line 10, we need to strike and other forms of betting and gambling. We need to come down to line 12 and 13, all other forms of betting, and then we need to go to the constitutional question over here and on line 162 and strike and other forms of betting and gambling to make this about sports betting, which is what we're talking about now, what we're talking about designating it, so that we don't leave this open to anything that may come in later. We don't need to buy a pig in a poke. That's my amendment.
All right, thank you. So we have this amendment now that would very much specify that this would apply only to sports betting. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by raising your hand. Is there further discussion? I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a question. Representative Mallow.
Absolutely. And reference to the constitutional amendment on the yes and the no, it says the assembly to provide by law for sports betting and other forms of betting and gambling in this state for educational needs, healthcare services, and other purposes. My question to the gentleman's amendment, would that then stricken the lottery from that, because that is a form of gambling, and it says other forms of sports betting and gambling?
I think it would.
But this would be amending the Constitution, and so by striking that language, that would then strike the lottery. Is that the gentleman's intent?
All right, so I have spoken with Sean Marie, and she's indicated that in order to do that, that it would take her basically rewriting the bill. I think that the bill at hand is what we need to stick to as far as whether we're going to vote for what is here, or else we would need to come back another time. And I think we're running out of time here. So is there any additional discussion? All right, Representative Bonner.
I would say that if we're going to talk about time, when I came in here today was the first time I saw this and the other legislation that we are going to consider. So I would put forward that if we are going to use time as a measure of how important this is, I think we ought to get it right and put this on the table for today and come back later after these changes have been made.
I second that.
All right, thank you. Representative Allen.
Non-debatable.
All right, so Representative Bonner, is that a motion to table?
Yes.
All right, so will you say that again?
I move to table.
All right, thank you. We're trying to capture this. So we have a motion to table which supersedes any other motion, and at this time we will take a vote on the motion to table. Is there a second? Second. All right, we have a second on that. All those in favor indicate by raising your right hand. All those opposed? All right, so the motion fails. I think it was pretty clear that the motion failed by the votes.
I would ask for the count, please. I think I have that right. Do I not?
All right, so we'll do that again. All right, so to give our staff time to count. Again, those in favor of the motion to table this bill indicate by raising your hand. All right, those opposed? All right, so it's 8 to 12. All right, so back to the previous question. Representative Allen.
I'd like to offer an amendment as well. As I stated earlier on line 54, just inserting the word public to read capital outlay projects for public educational facilities.
Can you say that again?
Line 54, an amendment to include the word public, so the 54 reads capital outlay projects for public educational facilities. Just mirroring what's on line 47 and 48 with public institutions and public post-secondary.
All right, so that's a motion to amend and include the word public in front of educational on line 54. And is there a second to that? All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there discussion? I want to recognize Representative Hatchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. this question I think is for probably Sean Marie. If you do that, there are private institutions of higher education that their students do receive funds through Hope. Will this mess that up? Oh, it's just capital projects. Well, that still pertains, I guess, because you do have some private colleges and universities, I think, that have received money for capital projects through lottery. I don't know if it's through lottery. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't apply.
I think that would be a question more for the lottery corporation to answer whether or not there are capital outlay projects that they have funded that would not necessarily be considered public educational facilities. I'm not sure of the potential ramifications of that. If that would change some funding that is currently being allotted to particular educational facilities.
And just out of curiosity, is there anyone here from the Lottery Commission that could speak to that? Well, that's great. All right. All right. Anybody that's watching this that's with a state agency, when we're doing a bill that's got you in it, we would appreciate it if you come. All right.
I guess they don't want the money.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Okay, Representative Allen.
For the, at the expense of not having any unintended consequences, I withdraw.
Okay, gentleman withdraws that. All right. Representative Houston.
Yes, I'm sorry I got here late. I thought this was in Representative Powell's committee, so that was the reason I was late until I saw it on TV. I mean, on the TV. I just read on question 9, you're talking about sports betting, the Georgia Sports Betting Commission. Is this going to be something like the marijuana commission we appointed?
That's in the bill. We'll cover that next.
Is it going to be sort of like that, or will the lottery will not be controlling this, the sports betting? Correct?
We're gonna get in that in the next bill. This is only the constitutional amendment.
Well, why do you have that in the printout on it? The key highlights. I mean, apparently. Sports with, okay.
Is that SR or SB?
She's looking at the sports betting.
I'm looking at sports betting.
That's the sports betting summer. We're gonna do that next. After the constitutional amendment.
Oh, we got voting on. Oh, shit, I thought I saw sports betting.
All right. Representative Mallow.
I move that we amend line 138 where it says of mental health and substance abuse and other related programs. He withdrew.
Yeah, he withdrew that previous motion on the amendment.
He withdrew.
Yes. Okay, hold on one second. We have a motion from Representative Mallow. Would you state that again?
I move that we amend line 138 after of mental health and substance abuse treatment and other health-related programs.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to amend line 138 to include after the word "and" substance use treatments, substance abuse treatments. All those in favor indicating by raising your hand. Aye. All those opposed? Oh. All right. Okay, can you, if you don't mind, could you go back to the ayes one more time? Raise your hand if you support that. All right, thank you. It passes. Okay. Representative Houston.
We had a hearing. I mean, I thought it was another committee, but we had a hearing on this? Oh, it's just a hearing.
This is the hearing. All right, Representative Allen.
Yeah, from the Department of Redundancy Department, I just want to ask one more time if it's possible to move the enabling legislation first and come back to the constitutional amendment?
Chairman.
There's just a lot of reference to the enabling legislation, and I think voting on the constitutional amendment before we even know what's in the enabling legislation is somewhat out of order.
Yeah, it's up to the chairman if you'd like to suspend. You have a motion and a second, but it's up to the chairman if you'd like to suspend and move to the other bill.
All right, currently there is no second to that. So, all right. So we have a motion and a second to suspend this vote on the Senate resolution and to take up the enabling legislation before we come back to the enabling and back to the constitutional amendment. All those in favor indicate by raising your hand. Aye.
Don't care. It's going to be.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
For that to happen, I withdraw my motion.
Your amendment to the Senate resolution.
My original motion to do pass.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, and those opposed to taking up the enabling legislation indicate by raising your hand. Yeah, they're wanting to take up the enabling legislation first. All right. All right. Those indicate by raising your hand that you don't want us to take up the enabling legislation first. All right. All right. So the motion carries, and we're going to take up the enabling legislation first. So now we're going to move to, we've suspended the constitutional amendment. We're going to move to SB 142. And Mr. Chairman, if you want to present that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be Senate Bill 142, LC 365311S. And I'm going to go by sections, if you don't mind. We're going to start with 50-27-9, talks about the general powers of the Lottery Corporation and authorizes the Georgia Lottery Corporation to carry out responsibilities in Article 4. And you can raise your hand and I'll stop between each section. Shortfall Reserve. This one is on page 3, I recall. This establishes a minimum reserve and allows the General Assembly to appropriate up to 10% of the excess. What we have now, ladies and gentlemen, is we've got a floor that causes the lottery reserve to continue to put money in it forever. There's no stop. So what this does is once the lottery reserve hits 50% of the previous 3 years average, we stop putting money in the reserve and we put the money where it's supposed to go, and that's to Hope and Pre-K. So that's what this thermostat will do. It's an on switch and an off, just like a thermostat. That is 50-27-13. That will generate quite a bit of revenue back for the program. 50-27, 120, and 121 is a new article for the lottery education. 50-27, 120 is the definitions of online sports betting, and it defines the online sports betting and the OSB service provider type 1 sports betting licenses, and I'll get to the licenses in just a minute. 50-27-121 talks about the procurement process and the service providers. As you move on down to the part 2, which is 50-28-1 through 22, this was a new article that was put in. 50-28-1 is just the short title. 50-28-2 is a legislative findings and declarations. 50-28-3, these are your definitions for adjusted gross income. This was Chairman Houston's piece that we put into the to the legislation, which essentially says that whatever you bet minus the tax minus your payout is your adjusted gross income, instead of what was suggested in the original bill is that trinkets that might be offered could offset. Essentially, this would hurt the taxpayer. So we're going back with the adjusted gross income to be the adjusted gross income. Last year. Yeah. This bill has been going on for a while. AGI. It also defines a bettor, the exports event, the different kinds of bets, placing under the Department of Revenue, creates tiers of sports wagering, creates types of eligible retail entities, sports betting licenses, sports wagers, sports betting distributors, sports betting machines, etc. All of this is in 50-28-3. We'll talk in a minute a little bit further down with what a Type 1 license is and a Type 2. 5028-4 is the Georgia Gaming Corporation and Sports Betting Commission are created. We've never had a gaming commission here, and I submit to you that had we done that before we put in COAM machines, we would have been so much better off. There would be an oversight. This talks a little bit about on 5028-5, the membership of the committee. They're going to be appointed by 3 from the governor, 2 from lieutenant governor, 2 from the speaker. 50-28-6 talks about the removal of members from the commission. -7 talks about the commission meetings and a quorum. -8 talks about the executive director of this commission. -9 talks about the commission powers and duties. -10 talks about the ineligibility of a commission on their employment. There are certain things that you can and can't do. Mostly you can't to be part of that commission. 5028-11, the commission employee charged with a felony or misdemeanor. It goes into what happens there. As you move over to Part 2, 5028-20 talks about the notice of arrest. Like I say, this is serious stuff with the commission. 5028-21, gifts, unprofessionalism, and improprieties is in that section. 5028-22 talks about restriction from 1 year to before you can be on a commission or be appointed. Includes legislators. 5028-30 through 32, 30 certifies the fitness. 31 talks about false information. 32 is ex parte communication of the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission investigation. 5028-40 through 45, which is Part 2, starts with sports betting licensure. And it talks about the reserve. There shall always be a reserve for this licensure, $500,000 to make sure they can make payouts. The renewal, once you get a license, it is renewable every year for 10 years. Ineligibility for a license is 50-28-42, talks about the ineligibility of a license. -43 is the limited number of Type 1 licenses. There are a total of 18 Type 1 licenses. The best way to explain a Type 1 license is this is a Type 1 license. A Type 2 license would be a kiosk for a retail operation. A Type 1 license costs you $1 million each and $100,000 non-refundable application fee. And again, there's 18 of those. 9 of those will be reserved for our professional teams. 9 of those will be untethered. All of them will be the same price. Type 2 licenses, again, is 50-28-44. Talks about the Class 2 licenses. That would be your retail piece. 50-28-45 talks about online sports betting. And then you move to Part 3. $60. 50-28-60 talks about the commission promulgating rules for minimum requirements. Part 4 is 50-28-70 and 71. 70 is the annual privilege tax, which is a 20% adjusted gross income paid monthly. Dash 71 is a report on wages and conflicts of interest. Dash 80 through 100, starting with license violations. Minors cannot place a sports bet, 21 years or under. Wages are only allowed in the state of Georgia. You are geo-fenced, so if you go to Hardeeville, South Carolina from Savannah, you will be ineligible and your phone will not work. Ineligible list of bettors will be also supplied, so there are those who are ineligible to play. Those will also have a list. There are certain things that you shouldn't bet on, and they're disallowed in this bill, contrary to public policy and unfair to bettors, and that are things like injuries, penalties, player recoupment, that kind of stuff. None of that stuff is eligible to place a sports bet. Part 2, which is 50-28-90 and 92, is the player account and register. You have one account, one account. Essentially, there is no charge accounts. You cannot use a charge card. You may use cash, a bank transfer, or a debit card. There is no, in fact, there's penalties if the company sets up a charge account. It is 50-28-91 talks about self-restricting and responsible sports betting, and each year they will send a report to the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor. 50-28-92 talks about license policies. 50-28-100 talks about the official data, and that is in the data that's used. 50-28-110 is access to facilities during normal business hours. This has to do with checking the books, if you will. If you've got a license in the state, the Gaming Commission has an opportunity to come in and check and see what you've done, and they have full authority to do that. 50-28-11 talks about the licensed corporation and reporting. 50-28-112 has law enforcement investigations. Some of that has to do with minors and to make sure that no one under 18 is gaming and placing a bet. 50-28-120 talks about investigations and hearings and revocations and fines, where you're going to look at an offense of $1,000 to $2,000, $5,000 on recurring instances, and a non-licensed person that might give a bet, for example, that doesn't own a license in Georgia, their fine would be $10,000, $15,000, and $50,000. Assessments and subpoenas are in the bill. That's in 50-28-121. 50-28-122.
Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to clarify, did you mean 25,000 there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Sorry. I did. Thank you. And 50-28-122 is the appeals court, whenever there are those fines, for the Fulton County Superior Court. We're getting close. 50-28-123 talks about the non-public information that cannot be disseminated. 50-28-124 talks about the civil penalties, again, that are, again, not more than $50,000. These sports betting, just like the lottery, are exempt from sales tax, even though we will be taxing them at 20%. I might add that the retail piece is taxed actually more than 20%. We retain 20% of the gross revenue. That's on a Class 2 license. 48-8-3 talks about, that's in the bill part 3, the exemption from state sales taxes. I just brought that up. And then part 4 has the effective date dependent on the constitutional amendment, number 1, as passed and ratified. And Mr. Chairman, that is the bill.
All right, so members, Chairman Stevens has walked us through the enabling legislation for sports betting. And now would be your opportunity to ask questions about this bill that we have before us. So I'm going to start, because he has waited patiently, Chairman Nix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First a comment and then back to my idea that we need to limit the constitutional amendment. But to the sponsor there, is it not true that the biggest scandals that have occurred in sports have usually arisen around gambling issues?
And there's big penalties for that in this bill.
Another question, has it not ruined a lot of lives, and is there not a big-time Georgia sports figure right now who is not going to be able to play for a year because of gambling issues while he was out working on his mental health?
That's, again, in the bill, and it's a big fat fine, ladies and gentlemen, and you'll be excluded from the sport.
Okay. Representative Robichaux.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand, if we get to the point of the type 1 licensure, that they would be suspended, revoked, or refused to renew. That would, again, also be done by the geofencing, so they would basically be blocked out of Georgia. So, because once it's on my phone, you know, if I'm in Georgia, are we going to block those out? It's on lines 1355 through 1358. I'm assuming it would be done somewhat by that geofencing type concept for a suspension / revocation of their license, or am I misunderstanding it?
An app that would be a sports betting operator who sets up their app to be used in Georgia and who is licensed to do so would just no longer be able to use, where they'd no longer be able to have that product licensed to be used in Georgia. So it wouldn't so much be geofenced off of your phone, it's they wouldn't have that app available to be used in Georgia.
But so again, on my phone, would it just not work
It would
if
just
I'm
not
in
work.
Georgia?
Yes,
That's,
I'm sorry.
I consider it that.
Okay.
I geo-block them.
Yeah.
per se.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Stevens, for going through that quite eloquently. So that I may understand, having been here for something such as this, is this considered the enabling legislation?
It is.
Another question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I believe earlier when I asked the question about responsible gambling, you mentioned that it would be addressed in the enabling. Did I misunderstand? I heard you mention it, but I couldn't find it. If you could just refer me to that, please.
Yeah, it's, hold on just a second.
This is for my information. Thank you.
Beginning in line 1193, and then continuing forward from there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line 263, I'm not understanding. Can you explain the golf tournament Section 263 to 273.
Yeah, that's the PGA. You want to do that?
I'm going to leave it to legislative council to explain the need for the wording such as this, but under the language here, the commission would determine what is the highest level of professional golfing offered in the state, and then a sanctioning body that has one of those tournaments here at the highest level plus one other at some other level, not necessarily the highest level, would be able to obtain a Type 1 sports betting license.
Okay. So currently you can't bet on golfing? I'm confused. I'm just not familiar. Is that true?
Golf would be a type of event that you could bet on under the sports betting licenses that are contemplated by this, yes. But this is a separate issue as to the awarding of a license to teams and venues that have investments in the state of Georgia.
And so this is just defining what that would look like if golf was to want to be a part of this.
Yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Representative Neal?
Yes, sir. I have a few follow-ups.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay. So on line 346, I mean, you start getting into it when you start on page 14 outlining the appointees to the commission. So of the 5, just confirming that of the 5, there has to be 1 law enforcement official, 1 public accountant. Let me start this way. 1 law enforcement official on 344, 1 public accountant on 346, 1 attorney on 348, and then the other 2 positions can be anyone. Is that confirming? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, the commission actually has 7 members, and if you look at line 342, because there are different appointing authorities, and you don't necessarily know that one appointing authority may not appoint an attorney, and you can't control what they do. The language here is that the authorities should consider appointing members who meet those 3 criteria, but that leaves open criteria for all the other appointments. And again, it's a should, not a shall.
Gotcha. Okay, follow up, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Line 350, just because I'm not familiar, so right now, when it comes to the licenses, no, pardon me. I think I'm ahead of myself. I have it marked as 350, but when it comes to the licenses, a certificate of fitness, what is considered a certificate of fitness? 351.
So under the FBI, I don't know if it's federal law or regulations, but the FBI cannot provide background information to anyone other than an agency of the state, which would be, for example, the Department of Law, Department of Revenue, or some other department. The Georgia Gaming Corporation and Georgia Gaming Commission are an instrumentality, not an agency of the state, and so they cannot receive FBI background information. So in order to create a process by which a state agency, in this case it's the Department of Revenue, can get the information as to whether someone passes what is necessary for a background check, there's a mechanism here which creates a certificate which the Department of Revenue would issue based on information it receives from the FBI for that background check. So in other words, you would someone who's applying for a license or someone who's an officer of a corporation would have to fill out this form to determine if they are eligible. That would be processed through the Department of Revenue, which would then just simply give a thumb up or a thumb down to the Gaming Commission.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I've got a few questions. As you can imagine, getting handed a 57-page bill when we walk in is a little tough to digest. A couple of things. So it lays out what what types of areas, what types of activities people can bet on. It wasn't quite clear though. Would this allow in any way for betting to take place on high school sports at that level?
No.
Even if it was outside of the purview of a school. So, for instance, a travel league or an independent league, something like that.
No.
Does it say that in there?
It tells you what you can
Because it does say independent leagues and organizations.
The types of sporting events are defined in online.
I think like around 214.
Beginning at 210.
Right. So, for instance, sporting or athletic event conducted or organized by a sporting events operator. To me, that seems like that would be, I know down in Peachtree City, we've got a number of independent leagues for high school age athletes where they have baseball tournaments, soccer tournaments, lacrosse tournaments, things like that are leagues that are independent of any recreational and government recreational activity and independent of any school. So would it allow for betting in that instance?
If a national, international organization or association sanctioned those, I suppose theoretically it could.
Okay. So we could, in fact, bet on high school level athletics and even below if it was sanctioned.
Well, high schools are separate from for example, they're not. For example, you might have Olympic age athletes who are competing in Olympic events, and that takes place. But this does not contemplate betting on high school activities.
In fact, if you'll look on line 121, it says a professional sporting or professional athletic event, including motorsports sanctioned by the national, international organizations, college sports you can bet on, Olympic sports all the way down. 211, excuse me. Dyslexic today.
Right. It certainly does say that, but it also goes on to say on 217, sporting or athletic event conducted or organized by a sporting events operator as a separate line item, correct?
If the question you're asking is there a prohibition on betting on high school sporting, there's not a prohibition here on that. Is that the question you're asking?
The question is, would there be a scenario under which people could bet on sports that are conducted by high school aged and even younger athletes? And from what I'm seeing here, it looks like that would be permitted under the bill.
Sure. Again, for example, in Olympic events, there are a number of different competitions.
Sure, and the Olympics I can understand, sure. But again, I'm talking more about organized events, baseball, lacrosse, things like that are done outside of the bounds of a rec league or outside the bounds of a sanctioned school event. But these are independent activities that take place. A lot of people would pay to have their kids trained by these facilities and things like that, and they host tournaments. So based on what you're telling me, that we would be allowed to bet on those activities.
There's no prohibition.
Right, which means we would be allowed to do that. Okay, and then just a couple of follow-up questions. Can any league or organization opt out? So, for instance, if say Major League Baseball or any other one of these says, you know what, we don't want to sully our sport with having people bet on us in the state of Georgia, is it possible for a league to opt out?
I can't imagine.
I don't believe so. I'd have to think through that a little bit. That's a question that hadn't been presented, but I don't.
Because the way it's laid out now, nobody has the option. Correct. I mean, this just says as long as these activities are taking place, we're going to allow people to bet on them.
Nobody has asked that question. It's the other way around. They're asking for fan participation during the games, so nobody's even come up with that question of how do you, can you opt us out of somebody betting on that? So it's the other way around, is all the response we've had for months.
Okay. And then my understanding is that there's a limit to the number of licenses that are provided. Is that correct?
Correct.
And why is that?
We need to keep the value of these licenses high. We could have made them unlimited. In fact, we could have gone a different direction. We could have gone like New Hampshire. They do one license and they do 50% tax. We felt like that we ought to give more opportunities to the teams that have been asking us to do this, and and some of the folks that just want to participate. So to keep the license value high, we just put a finite number in there. And the number that was agreed on with the group is that met, and believe me, there was a lot of groups here. 18 was a number. We started at 14. 18 is that number.
It just seems to me, and I certainly appreciate that response. It just seems to me that if it's this good, we should have an unlimited amount of licensees, right? I mean, because if what we're after is to just suck up as much revenue as we possibly can to cure all of the ills in our state, we ought to just offer that to as many folks as we possibly can. Because in some cases, it would seem as though, and I know this is not the intent, but it would seem as though that we might be kind of picking the winners and losers in this endeavor.
We are picking we're picking those that are that can afford to do the business right here in Georgia. We do not want folks to come in here, and we've seen some of that stuff with COAMs. We do want to make darn sure that whenever they come in here, they can afford to play, and they can afford to pay. So those licenses are. We could have made them unlimited, and I'm not sure that we wouldn't have gotten some unscrupulous activities, and that was some of the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Allen.
Just quick question. The commission, starting at line 303, talk about the commission. Is it a good assumption to say this will be the same commission for other forms of gaming as well? So we're establishing this commission not only for the sports betting, but also other forms of gambling as well once those come forward.
True. Could be.
Could be used for those purposes.
Okay. Just
yep. And that's something we've never had either. This is, as you might know, the lottery is their job is to sell lottery tickets, and we've never had somebody with, for lack of a better word, a hammer to come in and control some of this stuff. So that's what the commission's supposed to do. So yeah, it could.
Representative Mallow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go back to a previous question from earlier, line 135. How did you come up with the language on fantasy or simulated contests? If you could provide some clarification for me there. Line 135.
Fantasy sports.
Fantasy or simulated contests. How did you come up with that language?
You want to do that?
There were dozens of individuals. There were dozens of cooks in that kitchen. Literally, dozens of entities and individuals who contributed to that definition.
Absolutely. Further question, could you explain in line 136 when it says in which players compete against each other and wager based on winning outcomes? Why is that only limited to against each other?
As I said, there were dozens of cooks in the kitchen, and this is what came out of a collective process. I personally wasn't involved in that, but lots of cooks in the kitchen, and we're asked to come up with something, and this was, I believe, the collective wisdom of that group.
I guess I think there may be other persons in the state and kind of engaged in this. My question is, would it then be possible to allow for a more broader term so that it could be, one or more players competing?
If you'd like, sure. This again, we had all the folks that do fantasy sports, and somehow this is what came out of that. We needed a definition. Quite honestly, since we weren't dealing with fantasy sports, my first inclination was to take it out, which is what I did. And we were just silent on the issue because fantasy sports and sports betting were not the same. And this will not allow fantasy sports. We just put a definition in there. So if this bill passes, if somebody wants to do fantasy sports, it's going to require another bill, some enabling legislation to come in and tighten it up.
Okay. Representative Sains.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Bowers, excuse my ignorance, but and you've been very helpful to the committee process. Who do you represent here?
Sure. I'm a lobbyist, and my clients are Golden Nugget Online Gaming, and I represent the Atlanta Dream Women's NBA team.
Thank you. In terms of the, Chairman Stevens, in terms of your testimony on it prohibit those under 21 to bet, I understand part of the rationale for allowing this is our lack of ability to regulate this industry, and get that given those are individuals not licensed in Georgia, not answerable. So what would be the mechanism that we would prevent those under 21 from playing?
The operators are going to have to come in and designate or certify that these folks are of age to game. And there's criteria, it's in the bill somewhere, I'll need to find it, that have several criteria like their name, address, and certain verifiable aspects just to make sure that they are of age to do this. And they are only allowed to have one account, email addresses, but they have to verify, and there's penalties on both sides, both of the person trying to bet underage and the operator.
Okay. They would not have access to what I'm assuming would be how you go to a bar. They don't have access to a photo ID or physical access, so I'm guessing they also don't have access to the DMV registry to check a license number against our registry.
We followed the language from the 33 states that are doing it today, and it seems to be working there.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Robichaud, you've been very patient.
In regards to Representative Bonner's question, 18, I know it sounds like a random number, but would you say that could be a reasonable number if we really want this gaming body or commission to hold these licensures then to the standards we've set, i.e., if I read this correctly, there could be anything from site visits that have to occur to their, computer terminals and all of those kinds of things, validating and also investigating if there are violations. So 18's, I know whatever number we choose, but that would give this commission and or the regulatory bodies and the investigative bodies, that they could do that job too. So we are trying to control it as best as we can if that's where we're going, instead of just opening it up to anybody.
That's true. Thank you.
Representative Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, could you estimate the revenue that Georgia would be receiving from these funds?
Yep. If we're looking at Tennessee, of course, again, there's 33 states. Tennessee is one of our closest ones, and others are on the way. It's about $100 million in Hope and Pre-K.
So $100 million take home, because that's when we talked about it before. It was a couple of years ago. It was what?
I'm only following. Of course, Tennessee's a smaller state, and they don't have the sporting diversity we got. So
right.
100 million is the number I use.
And can you remind me, please, how that would be divided according to this other legislation?
Sure. $50 million would go, if the number typically is 100 million, 50 goes to traditional Hope and Pre-K. 50 million goes to the Opportunity Fund.
Thank you.
All right, so that is the last of our questions that are on the board. I've tried to make sure that everybody got the opportunity to ask questions. And so at this time, I'm going to recognize any of the amendments or motions that you want to make. And Representative Mallow, you've had your light on here for quite a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 35, I just would like to offer an amendment that fantasy simulated contest means a game or event in which one or more players compete, striking against each other and wager based on winning outcomes, based on choices including but not limited to athletes and sporting events, so that the language is clear before it goes to the Lottery Commission for regulation.
So, Representative Mallow, hold on that 1 second. I failed to just ask if there was a call for a motion to, somebody want to make a motion to pass the bill, and then we can handle the amendments. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. All right, is there any further discussion before we get into any of the amendments? Now is the appropriate time for the amendments. All right, Representative Mallow.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend line 135 where it says fantasy or simulated contest means a game or event in which one or more players compete and wager based on winning outcomes based on choices including but not limited to athletes and sporting events, so that the language is clear before it moves to the Lottery Commission. So we would be striking against each other, and it would just say a game or event in which one or more players compete and wager.
Okay, so the motion is to insert the language
in which one or more players compete and wager based on winning outcomes based on choices including but not limited to athletes and sporting events.
All right, so we have a motion for that amendment. Is there a second? All right, I hear a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of Representative Mallow's amendment, would you indicate by raising your hand? All right, Representative, all those opposed indicate by raising your hand. All right, now Representative Mallow, I think there's some confusion about your amendment. Will you state it just one more time?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is
on line 135.
Moving into line 136 where it says fantasy or simulated contest means a game or event in which one or more players compete and wager based on winning outcomes based on choices including but not limited to athletes and sporting events. So that way if people are competing against each other, it can be one or more persons competing against each other, to clarify that.
Okay, does everyone understand what his amendment addresses?
I'm sorry?
All right, so that amendment passed. Do y'all have any thoughts on that?
No.
Okay, all right, all right.
Sorry.
Now we're moving on. All right, Representative Bonner.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to find a way to address my concern regarding the betting on high school aged activities. I mean, the Olympics, I understand that's I think that's a different category. But I'm thinking of in the Peachtree City Lightning League or some of our lacrosse tournaments and things like that. I don't know that it's necessarily appropriate to have a bunch of folks wagering on high school age kids. I mean, some of these tournaments get tense enough as it is. I can only imagine folks with when they've got money on the line. Would you be open to addressing that?
Sure, yeah.
So we would need to add something, I would imagine, after line 219, creating an H after the G. And the wording I would certainly need some help with from Ledge Council, but the intent is to prohibit betting on sports activities that took place outside of a school event, but a part of a club team or travel team.
Would it be better just to say that non-professional and college games shall be? That's pretty far. I think I'm looking towards.
Sean Marie, do you have any suggestions on that?
First of all, I would not give there's a G, I think I would, put it at the paragraph level and just say, such terms shall not include sporting or athletic events. And then are you trying to limit it so that it's, like they have to be above high school age, like the majority of the team is made up of that, or what is that?
Yes, that's correct, so that we don't have our little girls' soccer teams getting betting taking place on those.
Such terms shall not include any non-professional or Olympic sporting or athletic event where the majority of the players are high school age or younger. Is that no?
I mean, I think that would address my concern.
Oh, she said. She accepted.
Well,
All right, so Sean Marie, there we would add an additional paragraph somewhere around, what, lines 219, 220? And if you would mind, just state that once again, what language we would be inserting into this legislation.
Such term, it would be adding on line, between lines 219 and 220, at the same level as paragraph 32, something such as the following. Such terms shall not include a non-professional or non-Olympic sporting or athletic event where the majority of the players are high school age or younger.
How about just where the majority of participants are under the age of 18?
We got Olympics and.
Well, you're talking about a majority.
Yeah, I mean, again, if the intent, I want first to direct you to 1014. I didn't have the line number earlier. I have it now. I want to direct you to 1014, which specifically prohibits offering or accepting wagers on high school sporting events. But what I've been hearing you talk about is something other than a high school sporting event, correct?
That's correct. I'm talking about high school age athletes that are participating in, I'll just refer to it as a club team, right?
Again, I would offer that the likelihood of a national betting operator picking up and making a book on such type things is highly unusual. But you know, the concern is obviously a valid concern, and you know, that language, I'd like to hear it again.
All right, so this would be inserting under line 219, a new paragraph. And Sean Marie, if you'll read what the language would state.
Something such as, such terms shall not include a non-professional or non-Olympic sporting or athletic event where the majority of the participants are under the age of 18.
Yeah, that would address my concern.
Okay. So you now make that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I would make a motion, we amend the bill to include the language just stated.
All right, do we have a second? We have a second. All right, all of those in favor of the amendment as stated, indicate by raising your hand. All right, all those opposed, no. All right, the motion carries. All right, Chairman Nix.
I'll wait. We're about to vote on the bill itself, not the constitutional amendment.
Correct, the enabling legislation.
Okay. When we get to that, I want to go back to my amendment. So I'm good. I'll wait.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, I don't see any other folks wanting to make changes to the enabling legislation. So that brings us back to the original motion by Representative Mallow on Senate Bill 142, do pass as amended with the two amendments that we just made. And so at this point, we'll vote, and all those in favor indicate by raising your hand. All those opposed indicate by raising your hand. All right, the bill passes. All right, now we're going to go back to the constitutional amendment, SR 135. All right, we're now going to unsuspend. I need a motion to unsuspend now so that we can take up this legislation. All right, so we have a motion by Representative Allen,
Yeah.
and then a second. All right, thank you. All those in favor of unsuspending this legislation so we can take it up for consideration again indicate by voting, raising your hand and voting now. All right, thank you. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries, and so now we are back to SR 135. Chairman Nix, you have a question.
No, I wanted to reoffer the amendment that I had offered earlier.
Okay, would you state that again at this time?
Yes. Since we've made it clear that we are talking about sports betting, I would like to make our constitutional amendment be explicitly that. On line 9 and 10, lotteries, bingo games, raffles, and sports betting, strike out and other forms of betting and gambling. Then move down to line 12. At the end, strike out casino and all other forms of betting. And then on the question itself, it would be strike on line 162, after betting, strike out and other forms of betting and gambling. That way we make it specific to this, and we're not just leaving it wide open there for anything that comes down the pike later on. I think we need to be very specific on something this significant for the state.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Nix. So just again, make sure we're all on the same page. We just approved the bill that dealt with sports betting. This is the constitutional amendment, and what Chairman Nix is saying is that he would like to amend it so that it is specific to sports betting and doesn't apply to any other form of gambling. He's made that motion, and we have a second on that. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, keep in mind that if we do this, before anything can happen, the General Assembly must authorize it, any form of betting in the state of Georgia, in addition to what we already have. By doing this also, we take away the option of local control. So local control to me is a very big deal. It's the same thing that we did with alcohol. Nothing can happen unless those locally decide that it's going to happen. So I would ask that you defeat the amendment.
Isn't it true, though, we've been talking about local control here, but that local control would be something that other than sports betting has no local control element to it, if I'm not mistaken. We've been told that numerous times.
I understand that, but based on what you're saying, Chairman, that in order to do any of this, we have to pass this constitutional amendment in the way that it's worded to even be able to authorize
That any of the other issues that are on the table that are in this constitutional amendment, the General Assembly has to authorize anyway. There's no enabling legislation that will do this, but the piece that has to do with local control will be removed from any of these other issues. So, yeah, we would be able to pass a constitutional amendment for only sports betting, but if you want to give your locals without having to come back next year with Representative Mallow's suggestion with fantasy sports, with another constitutional amendment for something that's a sound-alike, look-alike, you would pass the constitutional amendment as it is.
Okay. All right. So does everyone understand here? We have a couple of questions. I'm going to recognize now Representative Smith.
So if this thing is going to bring in as much money as we say it is, are you worried that they won't vote for it again? Because if it's going to bring in all this money and do all this great work, wouldn't that prove how great this is going to be?
Fantasy sports will be back next year. They're going to look for what I hope is going to be a bill, and there'll be iSports. There's all sorts of other things that will require another constitutional amendment. That's every 2 years. This sports betting bill does not bring in an enormous amount of revenue. $100 million is not a lot of revenue when it comes to the lottery. The lottery has $1 billion in its fund. So I'm suggesting that we pass the entire thing so that we don't have to deal with it and leave it up to the locals to make that decision after the General Assembly comes back with enabling legislation. So there's several pieces to that.
Okay.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yes, you can.
So if we've got enabling legislation just on the sports betting and we've got the others listed, why didn't we have the enabling legislation just to cover everything in there and we'd be through with it?
We need to come back and address that at a later date. And today is not the day to do that. It's extremely complicated for anything else on a enabling piece of legislation. This was 60 pages, I believe.
57.
And this is only in sports betting. Now imagine if you do anything else, it's going to be very, very lengthy.
All right. Representative Evans, did you have a?
So just to confirm, if we pass this as amended, if we wanted to bring back a casino or horse racing in the future, it would just require 91 votes. Is that right?
And your county to approve it. The citizens in your county to approve it.
But it would be, 91s in the future.
Essentially exactly the way we do alcohol today. You know, you got dry counties and those that vote to do it. So, yeah, it's the future.
Okay, thank you. All right. Representative Saines.
Thank you. If I had a constituent, because I have plenty that are fine with sports betting and aren't fine with casino gambling, so as it stands, they would have to make the choice to either be for both or be against both as it stands without the amendment. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
If they go to the ballot box with how the bill is currently written, they can't choose to only be for sports betting. They would have to choose to be okay to allow in some way or possibly allow casino gambling, fantasy sports. It's all inclusive. Is that correct?
On the statewide vote. And then it comes back to the local vote if you so choose.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so back to Chairman Nix's motion that we amend SR 135 and make it only applicable to sports betting. We have a motion and we have a second. So those in favor indicate by raising your hand. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the motion fails. All right, so now we're back to SR 135 as it is currently written. And this would be the time where if you were Representative Allen, did you have?
I was just saying it should be do pass as amended. I think we did adopt Representative Mallow's amendment for substance use.
That is correct, once we brought that back from suspension. So do we have a motion to do pass SR 135 as amended? We have a motion. Do we have a second? All right. All those in favor of SR 135 as amended indicate by raising your hand. All right, all those opposed? All right, the motion carries. All right, thank you, members. We do still have one piece of legislation left. Representative Neal, you've been very patient, and I'd ask the committee members if you could stick around just a little bit longer and give Representative Neal your best attention, and we're going to move through this quick.
They're clearing out the room first. The room's clearing out. Is he ready? Huh? Okay, then vote yes fast. They're gonna vote.
All right, Chairman Stevens, come on up. No, you the man. Come on. I'm going to turn it back over to you. You're our chairman.
Oh, gosh. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a hearing on House Resolution 1026. Thank you for your patience. Representative Neal, you have the floor.
Yes. So thank you so much for having me today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you once again for bringing the bill again, as it did pass out of this committee last year. So this bill essentially is one you've seen before, just a different iteration and a different number. So it relates to determining the best way to fund the startup business grants for young people that we passed out of this committee last year. Last year, it was using HOPE funds. This bill, after 2 years of work, referring to the commissioner, deputy commissioner, of the technical schools of Georgia, Georgia Student of Finance, Chambers of Commerce, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, 3 committees. It's been through three committees and numerous committee hearings. We've had numerous revisions. It made it to the floor, but at the same time, we still had entities that wanted to see us explore what other alternative funding sources we can use outside of HOPE. So with that being said, this bill allows for us to create the study committee to establish which funding source would be the best way to facilitate allowing us to give students investment funds for their small businesses. And when I say students, I mean those students who do not want to go to traditional colleges that they're used to being guided towards. And I'll stand for any questions that this committee might have.
Members, any questions? Number 16.
Mr. Chairman, my question is not to the presenter, but to you. I know this is supposed to be a hearing only, but it's a 3-page bill. We just passed a 57-page bill we hadn't seen. I'd like to encourage you to let's take this up for a vote.
I'll accept that at the proper time, which is not right now. Number 19.
Some of the traditional, non-traditional ways, what are you considering as other mechanisms to use the funds?
So, say the question again?
I think you said that, I was kind of sort of listening.
No, it's okay. So when I made the reference to traditional versus non-traditional, so this is more so guided towards students who don't want to go the traditional route to college.
Right.
That's the typical 4-year college. If they want to be an entrepreneur and start their own business when they leave high school instead of going to traditional college, this allows for us to examine which funding source we want to use to provide them that support.
Further follow-up?
Absolutely.
So if an 18-year-old or 21-year-old wants to start a business and we could use some other forming mechanism so they can do that.
Right.
That would be the intent,
Right.
sort of. Okay.
Yes.
For 21, I think, is you, Representative Gamble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, this is a unique concept that kind of is outside of the box. And the way we got here was last year when we were talking about entrepreneurship and helping some of our young people that might be inclined to want to start businesses and have an opportunity to do that through some existing funds that would be available. And so I think that was how we got to this study committee, because right now we have a very structured model for Hope where it goes to pay for, you know, a student in a seat, in a class, in a college. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But for some of these young people that might want to start a business, and Representative Mallow talked last year about his landscape business, and there were a lot of other examples used, this would allow a very limited and narrow approach, but, you know, we would have to talk about all the mechanics of that. And so that was the idea here, and I think it's a worthy idea, and I appreciate you allowing me to support this bill.
Thank you so much, and thank you for signing as well.
Thank you, Representative Robichaud.
Also, thanks for bringing the bill. Just, I guess it's more of a recommendation. I'm hearing on one side you're saying a traditional four-year college, but yet, you know, someone going to technical college, I want to make sure we don't, you know, that could be a combination maybe, someone going on to technical college, but also possibly some additional funding to start that business if they go and get, so that they're not caught in between. Is that what your study committee would at least consider that, I would hope?
Yeah, so separate from this, I've already established the curriculum through the Technical Colleges of Georgia, and I presented that in other venues outside of this committee. So we do have something in place that should we pass and then get the proper funding allocated for this, they could actually go to the tech schools and be supported the way you're speaking to. Yes.
Number 3, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Neal, for bringing this innovative thought on how we can continue to advance workforce development, help with economic development, and help advance the careers of young people. So I wholeheartedly appreciate you bringing this, and I think it's a great idea, and I'd like to be able to vote to support it at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your support.
And let's see, 26, Representative Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative Neal. And I'm also supportive of this bill, and I would like to encourage you to look into something called baby bonds. I just read about these in like Bloomberg Business Week or whatever last night, and several states have explored baby bonds, and that's where, and basically the state makes investment in, you know, babies born in lower income families, and that they have these funds that are available to them when they're 18. And so a couple of states have done that.
Perfect. Yes, that will be considered. That is my first time hearing that, so thank you.
Representative Paris.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm a little bit unclear as to how much are we talking about allotting to a student or someone that is choosing to not go into a traditional form of or avenue of educating themselves.
Right. So thank you for the question. So prior to this, we were tackling that, but right now, the purpose of this actual study committee is to figure out just that. What that number should be and what that should look like. That's the purpose of the study committee.
Right, so we're still drawing from hope, though.
We are not still drawing from hope. The purpose of this study committee is to examine funding sources outside of hope to use to support the students.
So the state's going to go, the state's going to start loaning money? I'm lost.
No, this is not a loan, and it will not be a loan. Okay. But what we are doing is examining what other funding sources are available through going through this committee process.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Jackson from Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the idea, and a couple of questions have been answered. I think that when you look at young people now, you're a good example too. Braiding is very popular, and there are other young people that are out there with artwork and what have you. And even though they may not be in college now, with a program like this, they may decide if their program is working, that they will go and get some of the technical instructions that they may need. I think it's an idea. I like the idea of a study committee so that it can be figured out of where the funding would come from, how it would be handled, how long they have to be into that stage.
Right.
I like the idea.
And thank you so much, and thank you for the question. Originally, when this came to me is because we had a lot of people actually in the beauty industry and a few other industries that are in the technical school space that needed initial startup costs. Some of them were $500,000. Some of the areas we talked about as far as gap funding, and they didn't even have that small amount of investment to get started. So that's where this initially, came from.
Commissioner Dukes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, particularly for that observation. Is it not true that simply this is a study committee such that we can explore the opportunities for us to see if we can meet this need for kids who are coming out of high school?
That is correct.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. I think I've got 16. Who is that? It is the appropriate time.
I move due pass.
We got seconds all over the place. By acclamation. Yeah, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Holy cow. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, ladies and gentlemen.